So in this video, we're going to talk about the philosophy of Anaxagoris. So in this book, a Pre-Socratic reader, Anaxagoris and Empedocles are grouped under the heading of the pluralists. And what it says here is the problem faced by subsequent pre-Socratic philosophers, that's subsequent to Parmenides, was to find a way to reconcile Parmenides' rejection of change with the possibility of giving a rational account of the changing world of sensory experience. Both of the pluralists, Anaxagoras and Empedocles, responded to Parmenides by claiming that the basic substances of the cosmos are entities that have the features of genuine being that he had argued for, although these entities are clearly although these entities are clearly real, are eternally real and unchanging, they can be mixed with and separated from each other. So this is the big challenge, right? Because Parmenides comes along and basically rocks the world of pre-Socratic philosophy to its roots by saying nothing changes. Everything that ever is or was is eternal. So anything that can be always has been and always will be. And anything that can't anything that is not will never be and can never be. And people were like, yeah, that seems right. But we have a huge problem here because we know that things change. Like, we can see change occurring. So how do you explain that, or how do you come to terms with that in the context of Parmenides' assertion of the eternal nature of everything that exists? Well, Anaxagoras tries to blend this idea with the earlier pre-Socratic ideas of change, of the movement of matter in order to alter particular states. And he comes up with what I think is almost a Buddhist kind of paradox, where things always exist and they are part of a whole, and yet they change. So we'll see. So we get this first passage listed here. Because all things were together, unlimited in both amount and smallness, for the small too was unlimited. And when, or since, all things were together, nothing was manifest on account of smallness. For air and ether dominated all things, both being unlimited. For these are the largest ingredients in the totality, both in amount and in size. So this is where he follows Parmenides. Everything has always existed. All of the things are eternal. But what he says here is, for both air and ether are being separated off from the surrounding multitude, and what surrounds is unlimited in amount. So this idea of division within everything is the way that Anaxagoras starts to make sense of the gap between Parmenides' assertion of eternal everything and the reality we experience of change. He says again here, for of the small there is no smallest, but always a smaller, for what is cannot not be. But also of the large there is always a larger, and it is equal in amount to the small. But in relation to itself, each is both large and small. So, we have a couple of really interesting things here. We have the principle that basically there's nothing outside of everything. Even that there's always, like, even the smallest thing, there is something smaller than it. But we also have the introduction of a kind of relativity, where he says, in relation to itself, each is both large and small. everything contains within itself everything. Each thing contains within itself everything, is maybe a better way to say that. But in comparison to itself, it has all of the characteristics. So this is, again, this sort of maybe Zen Buddhist paradox. We get a bit clearer of an explanation of how things divide up or how things differentiate when he says, "But before these things separated off, when or since all things were together, not even any color was manifest, for the mixture of all things prevented it. The wet and the dry, the hot and the cold, the bright and the dark, there being also much earth in the mixture, and seeds unlimited in amount, in no way like one another. For none of the other things are alike either, the one to the other. Since this is so, it is necessary to suppose that all things were in the whole." So essentially what he's positing here may be, and according to the introductory material in A Pre-Socratic's Reader, there's philosophical and classicist disagreement about what exactly Anaxagoras means here. But I think this idea of seeds unlimited in amount, and that it is necessary to suppose that all things were in the whole, essentially means that the whole, for Anaxagoras, is potential. It is the sort of potential of the entirety of existence that comes out, that as it differentiates itself, as things start to separate out, even while remaining part of the whole, those potentials are fulfilled. So, I don't know, it's hard to tell exactly what he means and how literally we should take some of these things, particularly the concept of the seeds and the concept of the mind, which I'm going to talk about in just a minute. Because it's possible to read these in very literal, straightforward ways, but it's also possible to read them in much more figurative ways. And I tend to lean toward the more figurative way, but it's hard to tell. I want to give you a couple more passages in which Anaxagoras explains this idea of the unity of everything despite their separateness. So he says here, "And since the portions of both the large and the small are equal in amount, in this way too all things would be in everything, nor can they be separate, but all things have a portion of everything." And then later he says, "The things in the single cosmos are not separable from one another, nor are they split apart with an axe, either the hot from the cold or the cold from the hot." So again, this is really central, and I don't think we can wrap our minds around what Anaxagoras is trying to do here if we don't sort of accept that premise that fundamentally everything is unified, even though there are divisions that exist. Those divisions don't create genuine distinction. What they do is they allow the fundamental unity to create multiple forms without creating multiple differences, if that makes sense. The last thing that I think is really interesting and important with Anaxagoras is this idea of the mind. And I'm going to read you a couple of passages here about the mind, because I think it's hard to really get a grasp on what he's talking about here. So this is part of a passage. It says, "First, it is the finest of all things and the purest," that it being the mind, "and it has all judgment about everything and the greatest power. And mind rules all things that possess life, both the larger and the smaller. And mind ruled the entire rotation so that it rotated in the beginning. And at first it began to rotate from a small area, but it now rotates over a greater area, and it will rotate over a still greater one. and mind knew all the things that are being mixed together and separated off and separated apart, and mind set in order all things, whatever kinds of things were to be, whatever were and all that are now and whatever will be, and also this rotation in which are now rotating the stars and the sun and the moon and the air and ether that are being separated off. This rotation caused the separating off, and the dense is being separated off from the rare, and the hot from the cold, and the bright from the dark, and the dry from the wet. But there are many portions of many things, and nothing is being completely separated off or separated apart one from another except mind. And then another passage. And when mind began to cause motion, separating off proceeded to occur from all that was moved, and all that mind moved was separated apart. And as things were being moved and separated apart, the rotation caused much more separating apart to occur. So, this question of what he means by mind here, I think, is a really interesting and important one. It's possible that he's talking about something akin to phenomenology or sense theory, where individual minds are taken to create the universe, taken to create everything that exists. That is, that reality has no objective basis. It's simply a phenomenon of the brain. That's possible. I don't know that I think that's what Anaxagoris is going for here. I think it's more likely that he means something along the lines of sort of universal mind, or the mind of God, maybe, in a Greek polytheist sphere. I don't know exactly what that would be. Maybe chaos, which is, for somebody like Hesiod, chaos is the sort of origin of the universe, and things come from chaos. That's possible. This may be a sort of Jungian collective unconscious, perhaps. Or it may be something along the lines of the way in Taoism, or the path in Taoism, which is sort of nature or the force of the universe or something like that. Anaxagoras doesn't really put this into language that is especially concrete or clear. This is very figurative language, and because it's so figurative, it's very difficult to figure out exactly what kind of thing he means by the mind.